Hey, what's going on? It's Stranger and welcome to another YouTube music production video where my mission is to help you succeed in making music. And today we are doing something different. Tyr Kohout has offered to do a breakdown of his latest track XLD out on my label Deviant Audio. And if you haven't heard the track yet, then make sure you check it out in the link below. It'll give you a better understanding of the concepts that Tyr will go through. And XLD is available on all the major streaming platforms, including Spotify, Apple Music, and Beatport. As well, it got featured on Drum and Bass Arena recently, so go on over there and check it out. And if you want to get more content like this, then make sure you hit the like, subscribe, and share buttons. Alright, without further ado, let's check in with Tyr.
Hey everyone. Today we're going to be taking a look at my track XLD. The track name stands for Vintech X73, Universal Audio 1176, and Empirical Labs Distressor. It started with the bassline. I was playing around in Serum and running basslines through external hardware, and I came to realize that some of these sounds that you could make using your VSTs plus hardware were really intense. So after goofing around, I ended up with the bassline that you hear in the track. So today, I'd like to show you some of the creative process that I went down to make this track by showing you the individual stems and the subgroups, and I'll explain to you some of the creative challenges and technological challenges that I was able to overcome to deliver the track as it sounds today. I really liked making this tune, so I'm really happy to be showing you guys how exactly it was that I was able to put this track together. I wrote the bass line first, left it alone for a few months, and then came back to it later with a different mindset, and then wrote the rest of the supporting elements. So why don't we go ahead and take a look at that bass line, and I'll explain some of what's in there to make it sound the way that it does. Here's the session file. And so we'll go ahead and start with the bass. And the track, when it first starts, sounds like this. So the first bass line that comes in was just a sine sub bass that I ran through the hardware, and I used a T-Rack saturator to give it that certain tone that you hear. Without the saturation, more of a pure sine wave type of thing. Really like that saturator plugin, it sounds awesome. And then when the track itself actually starts up, we get something like this. And the bass line isolated sounds like this. It's just two detuned square waves resampled through hardware and low passed. What really makes it fit into place is a combination of processing both on the bass bus itself and the individual stem. So if we take a look at the stem, I have a Fairchild and Neve 1081 channel strip. Turn those off. You can see that this is just adding some saturation, and this is just kind of keeping things glued into place. A lot of the magic happens up here, where we've got a Brainworks stereo maker just to spread it out a little bit, a bus compressor to help tame the occasional bump in volume here and there, an instance of Serum effects. Every time that there's a snare hit, the bass will duck out. And this is to make room for the snare, because when you're limiting things a lot, and in this case, 18 decibels of gain reduction, you're gonna get a lot of pumping. So to make room for those drum transients, you've gotta essentially get the bass line out of the way. The easiest way to do that is to send MIDI from the snare to a different place. And in this case, there's the instance of addictive drums, and then here, the MIDI is also being sent to the bass bus. And if I turn that Serum effects off, you'll hear that the bass line's more constant and not being ducked out by the snare. And then with it back on. And then to make room for the kick, I'm using just a conventional compressor, and this EQ plugin's unused. There's an alternative version down here that comes in only so often, which sounds like this. And that just gets sent out to an echo. I made this bass line in FM8 and used Waves Vitamin just to add a little punch to the low mids. And that's really all there is to it for the bass. Let's talk drums. Here's what the drums on their own sound like. On the first half, and then the second half, So if we take a look at some of the individual elements, the snare, I made an addictive drums, and here's some of the settings that I use for it. It's a combination of the snare, close mic, the overhead, room, and a bit of bus processing. We can isolate the snare. You can hear what it sounds like on its own. And we can actually isolate the individual elements to see what they sound like. So that's the close mic. The room, overhead, and there's been a lot of care taken to ensure that there's a good ratio between all the individual elements and to make sure that they're all in phase. And you'll see that the room is heavily filtered, that the overhead has some dips and peaks here and there, and that the spot mic was darkened, and I took out some of the body down here. Then up here, I chose to use a non-alternating snare, so in other words, the snare would stay exactly the same as long as the velocity was always the same. And there's a very, very short volume envelope. Every time the MIDI hits, the snare will only play for a combined total of about 155 milliseconds. And you can hear by how short it is. But that's really all you need, because if it's any longer, then you're going to find that the snare just kind of bleeds over into the other parts of the track. This type of genre demands short snares, in my opinion anyway. The kick was resampled in hardware, and I've applied some fairly basic processing here just to make it sound brighter. So here's how the kick sounds with no processing. So I brightened with an EQ, took out a bunch of the lows as well to leave room for the subs, and they use neutron to exaggerate some of the transients. It's a nice sound, and I like that it only took 2 plugins. The shakers, just a bit of EQ, and the wave smack attack to exaggerate the sustain. We can disable all of this. Just helps it fit a little bit better. It's not too drastic. Down here we have another shaker layer. Some nice stereo action going on there. And on the actual shaker bus itself, got a Neve 1081. Just adding some grit and darkening it a bit. And the kilohertz transient shaper, giving it a more staccato sound. Now later in the tune, the shakers are increased, and we can take a listen to that. And this is where a lot of the roll comes from. So down here under extra perk, I'm using the Brower motion from Waves to make them move around the speakers, and a classic EQ just to filter off some of the lows so that it doesn't interfere with the kick. And then here, some of our bounce. Basically, I just removed a bunch of the lows to make even more room for those subs. And we can take the processing off. So I've effectively just made it lo-fi. And then this is the final layer. Classic shaker break. Just a little bit of EQ to smooth that out. And finally on the drum bus itself, I have another 1081 strip. Love this way this thing sounds. I really can't get enough of it. If we take that off, and with it on, really beefs it up. I've used the EQ to boost some of the lows, the highs, and cut the mids. Classic hi-fi curve, and I've filtered out some of the bass the first time, and then the second time with the Eternal EQ8. I'm trying not to let the bass well up too much in the kicks, because we really want to leave enough room for those subs. With this type of thing with so much reggae influence, we really want to make sure we have lots and lots of bass coming through the speakers. The next section is the effects. This one's fairly straightforward. It's just a couple of rises and hits and falls. For example, at the beginning of the track, there's a wash and pump hat that'll come in. I was inspired by Alex Perez for that one. And later in the track, that one comes back again. Just adds a certain dimension to it. We can take a listen to how it sounds before and after. And here it is back in. I made this by resampling a hi-hat sound with lots and lots of reverb and sidechaining on it. If we keep going along, we got our pads. Specifically, a lot of that guitar and pad action at the beginning is located down here. There's just basically a call and response type of structure that happens all the way throughout the track. Some things will be muted, some things will come back in. We can take a closer look at some of these elements, like this one for example. That's a fairly important effect in the track. And all I did was use the kilohertz Haas effect to give it a certain stereo tint. We can turn it off. It's just very mono and sort of flat. Haas effect will put a lot of stuff out of phase, so I made sure to reduce the stereo width so we would still have some reasonable sense of mono compatibility there. Another cool one would be this. Sort of a deep effect there, just a resampled saw string. That's what it sounds like without the auto filter. It's basically just moving on an LFO at 3/16, and I'm taking out some of the low frequency so it doesn't well up too much down there. Kind of gives it that resampled feel. Subtle ARP, which sounds like this. Just a bit of serum effects to give it a certain color. And then there's various little guitar samples and horn samples, like these. That's basically just an automated serum effects with a phaser. These samples are, I believe, from the 80s. I don't exactly know who played those horns, but I'd love to find out and tell you guys. That was a sample that I got from a friend of mine, Jesse. Here's another guitar hit. And that's just getting fed down an echo. And we'll review these shortly. They have a habit of acting up, because the feedback is often over 100%. And finally, there's the vocals. These are the little stabs that give the track that sing-along quality to it. Dubby vocals are really, really fun. I like working with them a lot. And here's another sample at the beginning. And the full sample really isn't much more than that. We can extend the handle of it to play the rest. Kind of a fun sample. And then that one just comes in and out here and there, like here, when there's a transition. And then there's an echo resample that I put in there just as a little flavor touch. We can go ahead and play that. Because of how much the echoes tend to go on and on, I wanted to resample some of these echoes just to make sure that I wasn't getting feedback loops like crazy. And the pads, just a bit of sidechain compression against the kick, just to make sure that the kick has enough room to breathe every time it hits. That's what that sounds like, and we can turn it off too. Back on again. It's a pretty pronounced effect when you're listening to it in isolation, but with the drums playing, it sounds pretty nice. I remember the first time I heard compression like that was actually on some early deadmau5 records. And then we finally got our echo, among other dub delays. The echo, I've automate it to have certain feedback parameters depending on where it is in the track, and it gives it that dub feel. And the output gain sometimes I've killed all the way down just to make room for the different transitions in the track. The Ableton internal echo plugin is amazing. Another delay bus using Wave H delay, really, really nice. And not much automation on there. A long reverb using Valhalla Vintage, like that on set to 1980s. All that means is it just cuts off the high frequencies a little more, and a Waves SSL comp. And I've also sidechained this reverb against the kick to give it a certain color. The extra long reverb, it's just like how it sounds. It's just a really long reverb using the internal reverb plugin, set to 17 seconds. Mostly use it for resampling. I didn't really use it much in the track. And finally, another echo plugin with some feedback automation. This one's just set to a different time. And in totality, that's what makes the whole track. It's just a combination of a bunch of individual elements with their own unique processing, lots of bus processing on things to make room for certain elements, and just a little bit of extra grit from outboard gear. And then finally, the master limiter. You'll see that I'm knocking off 18 decibels of gain reduction. It's quite a bit, but this limiter has a great sound to it for drum and bass. And then for the intersample peaks, I've got a second limiter on the master bus. I'll pull over my metering so you can show you what I mean. If you turn it off, we're getting digital overs. And that's even with the stealth limiter set to its highest oversampling amount. That's what I really like about the iZotope limiters. They have amazing oversample protection. And notice some of the dither settings. I've just turned DC offset on with a bit of dither on the output. And that's basically it. That's XLD. It was a really fun track to write. It took a while because I picked at it every so often until I felt it was just right. I rarely write an entire track in one sitting. I find it's helpful to come back with a fresh mind a bunch of times in smaller doses such that you can always come back with your fresh ears and a new perspective on things. I'm really glad that you decided to watch this. We'll definitely talk again soon, and I appreciate you watching. Take care.
All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed this track breakdown with Tyr Kohout. And once again, XLD is available on all the major streaming platforms, so check it out in the link below. And I definitely have more guests and special videos coming soon, so make sure you hit the subscribe button and stay connected. All right, so that's pretty much it for today, guys. Thanks for watching, keep practicing, and I'll see you at the next video.